My name is Miriam Cole. I'm 68 years old. And yesterday, my son told me I had 24 hours to leave the house. I was standing in the kitchen when he said it. Still holding the potholder I'd used to pull a peach cobbler out of the oven. I'd made it from scratch. Luca's favorite. The cinnamon was still hanging in the air. Ethan didn't even look up from his coffee mug. "You've got a day to find somewhere else to go, Mom." The words didn't land like a punch. No, they landed colder than that. Like falling into a frozen lake with no one reaching out a hand. I didn't speak at first. I looked down at the cobbler on the counter, steam curling softly into the morning light, and all I could think was how much sugar I'd used. It was too much. He always said I overdid it. I turned to him, finally. His dress shirt was pressed, collar stiff. Hair still damp from his shower. That same calculated neatness he'd had since he was a kid. But his eyes. There was something in them I hadn't seen before. Not frustration. Not stress. This was something colder. More final. "I don't understand," I said, voice low. "This is my home." He didn't argue. Just shrugged, took a sip of coffee, and said, almost bored, "It's not really your home, Mom. You've been here 3 years. Rent-free. Eating our food, taking up space. That's not the same as belonging." I want to say I snapped back. Told him about the nights I stayed up with Luca when he had the flu. About the dishes I did, the laundry I folded, the meals I cooked without anyone asking. About how I gave up my own apartment, my savings, my quiet retirement, to help him keep this house when his ex-wife left and the mortgage notices started piling up. But I didn't say any of that. I stood there in my cardigan and old jeans, socks slipping a little on the tile, and I felt like a shadow in my own life. Ethan's voice just kept going. Calm. Measured. Like he was reading from a script. "It's not healthy, Mom. For you to keep depending on us. It's time you learned to stand on your own again." Funny, I thought. That coming from a man who'd called me crying 3 years ago, saying he couldn't handle single parenting. Who asked me to move in. Help with Luca. Just until things got better. But what do you say to someone who's already rewritten the story? Maybe you felt this too. That moment when someone you love looks at you, and you realize they stopped seeing you long ago. You're not a person anymore. Just an obligation they're tired of carrying. The next voice that spoke wasn't Ethan's. It was Luca's. He'd come down the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes, earbuds still dangling from his collar. He glanced at the cobbler, then at me. "You're still here," he said. "I thought we talked about this." "It's weird, Grandma. My friends think it's weird you live here." The word "grandma" hit harder than it should have. It sounded sharp. Like an insult dressed as affection. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a juice box, and added, without turning, "You're not even, like, really my grandma anyway. Real grandmas don't sponge off their kids." I don't remember what I said back. Maybe nothing. I remember the sound of the refrigerator door slamming. I remember the sudden heat in my cheeks. And the way my hands started shaking. But what I remember most is what I felt in that exact moment. Not sadness. Not even rage. Just something breaking. Quietly. Deep inside. Like a small crack running down the center of everything I thought was solid. Have you ever felt that? When someone you love looks at you, and for the first time, you understand, they don't. They don't see you. Not really. Not the years. Not the sacrifices. Not the woman who used to be their whole world. Only what's convenient to forget. And in that moment, something in me shifted. Not into weakness. But into something sharper. Something they wouldn't see coming. I smiled. Just a little. Then I walked upstairs. And I opened the drawer I hadn't touched in 3 years. The one with the manila folder. If they thought I was the one who needed to leave, they were about to learn whose name was actually on the deed. You might want to stay with me for this. Because what happens next, it changed everything. And I wonder. If someone pushed you to the edge, would you push back? Or would you walk away and let them think they'd won? Let's find out. My name is Miriam Cole. I'm 68 years old. And yesterday, my son told me I had 24 hours to leave the house. I was standing in the kitchen when he said it. Still holding the potholder I'd used to pull a peach cobbler out of the oven. I'd made it from scratch. Luca's favorite. The cinnamon was still hanging in the air. Ethan didn't even look up from his coffee mug. You've got a day to find somewhere else to go, Mom. The words didn't land like a punch. No, they landed colder than that. Like falling into a frozen lake with no one reaching out a hand. I didn't speak at first. I looked down at the cobbler on the counter, steam curling softly into the morning light, and all I could think was how much sugar I'd used. It was too much. He always said I overdid it. I turned to him, finally. His dress shirt was pressed, collar stiff. Hair still damp from his shower. That same calculated neatness he'd had since he was a kid. But his eyes. There was something in them I hadn't seen before. Not frustration. Not stress. This was something colder. More final. I don't understand, I said, voice low. This is my home. He didn't argue. Just shrugged, took a sip of coffee, and said, almost bored, it's not really your home, Mom. You've been here 3 years. Rent-free. Eating our food, taking up space. That's not the same as belonging. I want to say I snapped back. Told him about the nights I stayed up with Luca when he had the flu. About the dishes I did, the laundry I folded, the meals I cooked without anyone asking. About how I gave up my own apartment, my savings, my quiet retirement, to help him keep this house when his ex-wife left and the mortgage notices started piling up. But I didn't say any of that. I stood there in my cardigan and old jeans, socks slipping a little on the tile, and I felt like a shadow in my own life. Ethan's voice just kept going. Calm. Measured. Like he was reading from a script. It's not healthy, Mom. For you to keep depending on us. It's time you learned to stand on your own again. Funny, I thought. That coming from a man who'd called me crying 3 years ago, saying he couldn't handle single parenting. Who asked me to move in. Help with Luca. Just until things got better. But what do you say to someone who's already rewritten the story? Maybe you felt this too. That moment when someone you love looks at you, and you realize they stopped seeing you long ago. You're not a person anymore. Just an obligation they're tired of carrying. The next voice that spoke wasn't Ethan's. It was Luca's. He'd come down the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes, earbuds still dangling from his collar. He glanced at the cobbler, then at me. You're still here, he said. I thought we talked about this. It's weird, Grandma. My friends think it's weird you live here. The word grandma hit harder than it should have. It sounded sharp. Like an insult dressed as affection. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a juice box, and added, without turning, you're not even, like, really my grandma anyway. Real grandmas don't sponge off their kids. I don't remember what I said back. Maybe nothing. I remember the sound of the refrigerator door slamming. I remember the sudden heat in my cheeks. And the way my hands started shaking. But what I remember most is what I felt in that exact moment. Not sadness. Not even rage. Just something breaking. Quietly. Deep inside. Like a small crack running down the center of everything I thought was solid. Have you ever felt that? When someone you love looks at you, and for the first time, you understand, they don't. They don't see you. Not really. Not the years. Not the sacrifices. Not the woman who used to be their whole world. Only what's convenient to forget. And in that moment, something in me shifted. Not into weakness, but into something sharper. Something they wouldn't see coming. I smiled. Just a little. Then I walked upstairs. And I opened the drawer I hadn't touched in 3 years. The one with the manila folder. If they thought I was the one who needed to leave, they were about to learn whose name was actually on the deed. You might want to stay with me for this. Because what happens next, it changed everything. And I wonder. If someone pushed you to the edge, would you push back? Or would you walk away and let them think they'd won? Let's find out. There are things I remember about Ethan's childhood with absolute clarity. Not the big events. Not birthdays or holidays. But small, quiet things. Like how his hair used to curl behind his ears in the summer. Or how he'd hum to himself when he built things with his blocks. Always that same tune from the Mr. Rogers theme song. He was 5 when his father left. Walked out one Sunday morning and never looked back. We were living in a small duplex in Chattanooga. The kind with thin walls and carpets that never quite came clean. Ethan had a hand-me-down twin bed and one small dresser. I was working part-time at the public library, shelving books during the day, and cleaning offices at night. Some nights I'd come home so tired, I couldn't feel my legs. But I'd still sit at the edge of his bed, listen to him talk about dinosaurs or bugs or whatever new obsession he'd picked up that week. He'd lean against me, warm and chatty, and say things like, "You're my whole team, Mommy." Back then, I thought love could carry us through anything. I believed that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, stayed soft and steady, it would all pay off. Do you ever look back and realize you were trying to earn something that should have been given freely? I did everything I could. I learned to stretch $40 across 2 weeks of groceries. I sewed patches onto his jeans when he tore them at recess. I said no to myself more times than I can count, just so I could say yes to him. I remember one Christmas, he wanted this blue bike with white wheels and a horn shaped like a rocket. It was at the window of Halston's Hardware, marked down but still far more than I could afford. I worked extra shifts for 6 weeks. Skipped lunch most days. Sold a small gold ring my mother left me. He found that bike under our tiny artificial tree on Christmas morning. His face, God, the way it lit up. He screamed, laughed, hugged me like he thought I'd hung the moon. He told me I was magic. I held on to that moment for years. But kids grow up. By the time Ethan hit middle school, things got harder. He started noticing what other kids had. He hated that I packed sandwiches in paper towels instead of lunchboxes. That I didn't come to every game because I couldn't afford to miss another shift. He started pulling away. I tried to keep up. Got a better job as a library assistant. Moved us into a small rental with actual grass out front. I even let him get a part-time job at the video store down the street. But something in him kept closing off. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers rebel. They push. I pushed back in my own way. Late night talks. Dinners at the same old table with chipped plates. My fried okra. My slow-cooked beans. Comfort disguised as habit. He made it through high school. Not with flying colors, but he made it. I cheered at his graduation like it was the Super Bowl. Brought peach muffins for the neighbors. Gave him my grandmother's necklace to give to his future wife someday. I said I didn't care what he did, as long as he stayed kind. He promised he would. He met Natalie in college. Married young. Too young, if you ask me. But he seemed happy for a while. They lived in Nashville, had Luca a year later. I visited on holidays, kept my distance the rest of the time. I didn't want to interfere. I thought giving them space was love, too. But then things changed. Slowly. A skipped birthday here. A cold tone there. And before I knew it, I was just Mom who visits sometimes. Not the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed. Not the person who stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes and crying quietly in the bathroom when he was sick and I couldn't afford medicine. You know what hurts the most? It's not being forgotten. It's being remembered only when it's convenient. That's what this move-in had become. A convenience. Dressed up like a favor. I told myself I was helping. That it was my choice. But if I'm honest, I moved in because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could still matter. That he might remember who I was. That I could be seen again. Instead, I became background noise. He never asked about my life. Never wondered if I was lonely or scared or tired. I was just there. Folding towels. Paying bills in silence. Picking up groceries with my own card and smiling like it didn't bother me. And then came the small humiliations. Not cruel. Just steady. Being introduced to people as, my mom, she's staying with us for a bit. Never, this is Miriam. Never with pride. Always with a caveat. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was too old to care about labels. But it does matter. It matters when you give someone your life and they give you the bare minimum in return. There's a line between love and use. I didn't see it then. Or maybe I refused to. But that line was growing clearer every day. And soon, they were going to cross it. I just hadn't decided what I would do when they did. Not yet. But the folder in the drawer, that was still there. And when the time came, I wouldn't hesitate. Not again. It started over nothing. I was folding dish towels in the kitchen. The window above the sink was cracked open, letting in that late March air, cool and damp. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down. On the counter beside me, a pot of lentil soup was still warm, a slice of cornbread cooling on a plate. Dinner was almost ready. Ethan was at the table, typing something on his laptop. Luca had just come in from school, dropping his backpack with a loud thud against the hallway wall. He didn't say hi. Just opened the fridge like he always did, scanned it for something better than what was already cooking. I wiped my hands on the towel, then offered, gently, "There's fresh cornbread, sweetie." I used the local honey this time. Luca didn't even look up. "Cool," he said, grabbing a soda instead. Then, like it was nothing, he added, "Maybe now I can have friends over without being embarrassed." The words hit in a way I can't describe. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just hollow. Like someone had taken the air out of the room. I turned toward him, slow. My hands still resting on the edge of the counter. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. Still didn't meet my eyes. "It's just weird, Grandma. You always being here. Like, my friends don't get it. They think it's sad." Sad? He took a sip of soda and finally looked at me. But his expression wasn't soft. There was no confusion. No awkwardness. Just cool detachment. "Yeah. Like, why doesn't your grandma have her own place? Why is she always in the background? It's like, you don't do anything. You're just here." The silence after that was sharp. Even Ethan looked up from his laptop, eyebrows raised, but he said nothing. I felt my knees falter. Just a little. Like my legs forgot what to do. I reached for the counter to steady myself, fingers curling around the cool edge. Luca noticed the motion and rolled his eyes. "God, Grandma, don't be so dramatic. It's not like you're really my grandma anyway." He said it without malice. Just carelessness. And that, somehow, made it worse. Real grandmas, he continued, don't live off their families. They have their own places. They take their grandkids on trips. They don't, like, just sit around cooking weird soup and watching old shows. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the night Ethan's father left. I stood very still. Watched as Luca walked past me, soda in one hand, phone in the other, already scrolling through something that mattered more. Behind him, the hallway light flickered, as it always did. No one ever fixed it. I turned to Ethan, hoping, maybe foolishly, that he'd say something. Correct him. Offer even a small defense. But he just exhaled and muttered, "He's a teenager, Mom. Don't take it personally." Personally? What part of that wasn't personal? I'd held that boy when he had night terrors. I'd read him stories from books that had once belonged to Ethan. I'd made him grilled cheese at midnight during finals week. I'd rubbed his back when he had stomachaches. I'd memorized the way he liked his eggs. And now I was something to be erased. A mild embarrassment. A parasite. That word hadn't even been said yet, but I felt it coming. I could feel it brewing in the silence, in the dismissiveness, in the indifference. And here's the thing that no one tells you. It's not always anger that breaks you. Sometimes, it's just indifference. The slow erosion of kindness. The casual cruelty of people who've decided you don't count anymore. I looked around the kitchen. The new backsplash I helped pay for. The orchid on the windowsill that I watered every morning. The rug under their feet I had picked out. Everything around me had pieces of me in it. And yet somehow, I was invisible in it all. You ever stand in a place you helped build and feel like a ghost? I wanted to scream. Not to hurt them. Just to make them hear me. To remind them I was still a person. Instead, I walked to my room. Quietly. No slammed doors. No raised voice. Just silence. And my name echoing in my own head like it didn't belong here anymore. Miriam Cole. I used to be someone. I used to matter. And maybe, just maybe, they were about to find out that I still did. Because nothing cuts deeper than being erased. But nothing burns brighter than a woman who's done being silent. Later that evening, after Luca's words had already burned their place into my chest, I tried to speak to Ethan. He was sitting on the couch in his usual spot, legs crossed, laptop on his knees. The TV was on, low volume, playing one of those endless nature documentaries. A desert. Camels walking under an orange sun. I couldn't focus on it. I stood in the doorway for a while before saying anything. I think part of me was hoping he'd look up. He didn't. "Ethan," I said, quietly. He typed something, then glanced up. "Yeah?" My hands were still a little damp from doing the dishes. I rubbed them on my pants. The ones with a small bleach stain near the pocket. I'd had them since before I moved in. "I wanted to talk to you. About earlier. About what Luca said." He gave a half shrug. "He's a teenager, Mom. He says dumb things." I took a breath. Not too deep. I didn't trust my voice if I let too much air in. "It wasn't just dumb," I said. "It was mean. And it wasn't the first time." Ethan sighed. Closed his laptop. Leaned back like I'd just handed him a list of chores. "He's under a lot of pressure," he said. "You know how kids are. They lash out. It's not personal." That phrase again. I sat down on the armrest of the chair across from him. My knees cracked a little. He didn't notice. "It felt personal," I said. "It felt like he's been taught it's okay to talk to me that way." He gave me a look then. Not angry. But tired. That low-grade annoyance people get when you're saying something they don't want to hear. "You're being sensitive," he said. "You always take things the wrong way." I looked at him. Really looked. Dark blue t-shirt. Hair a little messy. That half-beard he never quite bothered to shave completely. His shoulders slouched like a man who'd carried too much. Or thought he had. "You think I take things the wrong way," I repeated. "Even when your son calls me a burden. Even when he says I'm not his real grandma." Ethan didn't respond. He just looked back at the screen, where a lioness was stalking something in slow motion. Do you know what I gave up to be here? I asked. What I left behind? He glanced at me again. Mom, no one asked you to do all that. That sentence. It knocked the air out of me. Like someone had slammed a door I didn't know was open. No one asked me. I said. You offered, he added. You said you wanted to help. I laughed. Quiet, sharp. Not because it was funny. But because I suddenly understood something I hadn't before. He didn't see it. Any of it. Not the sacrifices. Not the long nights. Not the money. Not the life I gave up. He thought of it all as something I chose. A favor I threw into the wind. He didn't remember the way he sounded on that phone call 3 years ago. How his voice cracked. How he begged me to help him keep this house. How I sold my home, drained my savings, gave up the one quiet corner of life I'd worked decades for. Because no one remembers when they beg. Only when you stay. I sat there, on the edge of the chair, and looked at my son. The boy I raised with coupons and night shifts. The boy I carried on my hip through grocery stores. The one I skipped meals for. Lied for. Prayed for. And he couldn't see me anymore. Not really. Do you ever realize, far too late, that the person you thought you'd raised never really saw you at all? I stood up, slower than I meant to. My legs weren't ready, but I didn't want to sit another second in that conversation. I guess we see things differently, I said. Ethan nodded, like the matter was settled. And that was it. I walked back to my room. Closed the door gently. Sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closet. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the gap. The space between how I remembered our life, and how he rewrote it. He believed I offered. I remembered him pleading. He believed I was being dramatic. I remembered being erased. I stared at the small lamp beside my bed, the one I brought from my old apartment. Its soft yellow glow reminded me of who I used to be. A woman with boundaries. A woman who made decisions. That woman had been gone for a while. But I felt her again. Just for a moment. Just enough to reach toward the drawer. The manila folder was still there. Still untouched. Still mine. And something deep inside whispered that it was almost time. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the quilt, fully dressed. Old flannel pajamas. My favorite pair. Faded blue with tiny white flowers. There was a tear along the sleeve I hadn't gotten around to fixing. I kept rubbing my thumb along it, like maybe the fabric could tell me what to do. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock and the low hum of the fridge. No voices. No footsteps. No Ethan. No Luca. Just me. And the question that kept circling in my mind like a quiet storm. What happens when the person you sacrificed everything for decides you no longer matter? I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. The light from the street lamp slipped through the blinds in strips, laying pale lines across the bed. Each one felt like a reminder. You're still here. You're still standing. I got up slowly. My knees ached, the way they always did when the weather turned. I walked barefoot across the room, the floor cold under my heels. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, tucked behind a stack of old sweaters I no longer wore, was the manila folder. I hadn't opened it since the day I signed the last page. 3 years ago, after Ethan called me crying. After I sold my condo and cashed out the retirement I'd spent 3 decades building. I hadn't even looked at the papers since. Not because I forgot. But because I didn't want to need them. You see, I didn't move in planning to fight for space. I came to help. To heal something. To be useful. But tonight, sitting on the edge of the bed with the folder in my lap, I felt none of that. I felt clarity. I flipped the folder open. The first page was the property deed. My name. My signature. Clear as daylight. The official stamp from the county office in Knoxville. Next came the wire transfer records. Every cent I'd put into this house. The down payment. The closing costs. The months I covered the mortgage when Ethan had fallen behind but told no one. Then the insurance documents. The taxes. The maintenance receipts. Pages and pages of proof. I wasn't a guest here. I was the owner. And yet for 3 years, I'd been treated like furniture. Something useful until it got in the way. I glanced around the room. The small dresser. The single nightstand. The framed photo of my parents. A wilted bouquet of chrysanthemums from last week's farmer's market. This little room that was supposed to be temporary. A place to help Ethan get back on his feet. It had become my world. But now, I was ready to step out of it. I took a pen from the drawer. Wrote one sentence on a yellow sticky note and pressed it to the front of the folder. Then I set it on the nightstand. Just looking at it made my pulse steady. You ever have that moment when you realize you're not crazy? That all those little indignities, those cuts, the shrinking, weren't imagined? This was that moment for me. I pulled out my slippers, made myself a cup of herbal tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the street was empty. A lone possum wandered across the lawn. The neighbor's porch light flickered once, then went dark. The world, as always, moved on. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was ready to move with it. I thought about how many times I'd bit my tongue. Smiled through disrespect. Swallowed my voice to keep peace that only benefited them. But silence doesn't mean I didn't notice. It doesn't mean I agreed. And it definitely doesn't mean I was weak. I reached over and touched the folder once more, letting my fingers rest on its edge. Tomorrow morning, would hand it to Ethan. Not as a threat. Not as revenge. But as a mirror. Let him see what he'd refused to look at for years. Let him understand that kindness is not the same as weakness. Because kindness, real kindness, draws a line. And I was ready, finally, to draw mine. I woke up before the sun. Not that I'd slept much. A few short dozes, maybe. But my body felt alert. Calm. My hands weren't shaking like I thought they would be. My joints were quiet. Even the ache in my left shoulder that usually greeted me at dawn was gone. I dressed slowly. Simple clothes. Black slacks. A soft oatmeal sweater I'd knitted 3 winters ago. I combed my hair back into a loose bun. Not to impress. Just to feel centered. I even put on earrings. Small gold studs Ethan gave me one Mother's Day years ago, back when gratitude still had a place in this house. In the kitchen, I heard movement. Coffee dripping. Cabinet doors opening. The soft clink of a spoon against ceramic. I stepped out into the hallway and stood there for a second, taking it in. The morning light had just begun to spill through the blinds. Everything looked normal. Ethan at the counter in his gray button-down, checking his phone while buttering toast. Luca on a stool, scrolling through something on his iPad, earbuds in. The same rhythm. The same habits. As if the world hadn't cracked open the night before. I walked in quietly. Set the manila folder down on the island, right in front of Ethan's coffee. He looked up. "What's that?" he asked, barely glancing at it. "A few things I think you need to see." He smirked. "Medical records? Is this about what Luca said yesterday?" "Because I really don't have the energy for drama this morning, Mom." I didn't react. Just nodded toward the folder. "Open it." Something in my tone must have landed differently, because his face changed. The smirk faded. He hesitated. Then slowly flipped it open. The first page. The deed. I watched his eyes scan it. Then scan it again. He blinked. Cleared his throat. Looked up at me, confused. "This says you're the owner?" I didn't move. It doesn't say that, I answered. It confirms it. Luca looked up from his screen. Wait. What does that mean? Ethan flipped to the next document. Bank transfers. Then the insurance records. The tax filings. All of it. Laid out clean, in order, without commentary. Just the facts. The color drained from his face. But you told me you were helping with the mortgage. I was. I said it softly. On my house. He stared at me. Open-mouthed. A little boy caught doing something he didn't fully understand. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum quieter. 3 years ago, I began, you called me crying. You said you were going to lose the house. That you didn't know how to raise Luca on your own. That you needed help. I kept my voice steady. Not cold. Just steady. You didn't qualify for a refinance. Your credit was ruined. You were behind on everything. I turned to Luca for the first time. His expression was harder to read. A mix of teenage defensiveness and something else. The only way to keep this place was for me to buy it outright. So I did. Ethan rubbed his hand over his jaw. But, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew that if I told you, you'd resent it. I knew pride would twist gratitude into anger. And I didn't want you to feel small. I wanted you to feel safe. Like you still had control. But control had never really been his. It had been borrowed. Built on a foundation he didn't even know existed. I never would've. Yes. You would've. I cut in. Not harsh. Just honest. Because you already did. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. But I hadn't raised my voice. Not once. For a moment, he looked like he was about to argue. Defend. But then he saw the rest of the folder. Tuition payments. Utility bills. Insurance policies. All of them. With my name. My account. My sacrifice. Luca's school, he asked, quietly. I nodded. But, you don't have that kind of money. No. Not anymore. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind born from awkwardness. But the kind that follows truth. Luca set his iPad down. You paid for all of it? He asked. Like, everything? I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Recognition. Maybe even respect. I did, I said. Quietly. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You show up. Ethan sank into a chair, slowly. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't want to know. And that, more than anything, was the truth. I looked at both of them, then picked up the folder. You told me I had 24 hours to leave. I let the sentence sit. Well, now you know who that decision belongs to. And I walked away. Not angrily. Not triumphantly. Just free. And maybe for the first time in years, fully seen. The silence after I walked away was thick. Not a word. Not a cough. Not even the sound of that always dripping kitchen faucet. I sat at the dining table. The big one Ethan insisted on keeping because it fit the space. It hadn't been my table. But now, it was. And I chose the head of it. I laid the folder down again. Slowly. Opened it flat. Let the documents breathe. Luca hovered near the archway, his phone still in hand, forgotten. He looked smaller than usual. Not younger. Just, less sure of himself. Ethan stayed seated. He looked like someone trying to piece together a puzzle with half the edges missing. I don't understand, he said, not to me exactly. Maybe to himself. Maybe to the kitchen walls. I didn't answer. Let the facts speak now. He picked up one of the bank statements. The header from my credit union. He read it twice, mouth slightly open. You used your retirement? His voice cracked. Yes. For this house? I nodded once. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. But why didn't you say anything? Why would you hide that? I looked at him. Calm. Measured. Because I knew you'd forget it the moment it no longer served you. That landed. He blinked. Once. Twice. Luca walked over slowly. Eyes scanning the papers like they might dissolve if he touched them. Wait. So you own the house? Like, really own it? Yes, Luca. But. You wanted me gone yesterday, I said. You told me I was just, here. Taking up space. Embarrassing. His face turned red. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. We didn't mean it like that. You did. Maybe not consciously. But you meant it. I reached for the receipt from the roofing work last winter. $4,800. Paid in full from my checking. Every repair. Every utility. Your car insurance, Ethan. The internet you both use. Groceries. Garbage pickup. Lawn care. School tuition. That nice espresso machine on the counter? Luca looked over at it. The one he always told friends came from a bonus Ethan got. All me. Their eyes darted back and forth between the folder and me. Like maybe it wasn't real. Like they needed one more layer of proof. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table. His voice was low now. You've been paying for everything? Yes. I thought, he shook his head. I thought I was doing okay. You were surviving. I made it livable. It wasn't meant to wound. Just clarify. But it landed like a cut. Luca sank into the chair beside him. The way his shoulders curled told me he finally understood the weight of what he'd said the night before. That parasite line wasn't just rude. It was wrong. You never said anything, he whispered. Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. Then why now? I looked at both of them. Because yesterday, you made me feel disposable. That stopped them. I could have yelled. I could have sobbed. But that sentence, said softly, held more force than anything else would have. You know, I used to think that love meant letting things slide. That it meant absorbing pain so others didn't have to feel it. But now? I see it differently. Love without honesty is just performance. And I was done performing. Ethan was breathing heavily now. Not panic. But something close. We were going to make you leave, he said. We actually told you to leave. Yes. But, how could we not know all this? Because you never asked. He looked stunned. Like I'd pointed out a mirror he didn't want to look in. Luca was still quiet. His fingers ran along the edge of the table, avoiding my eyes. We were awful, he said, so softly I barely caught it. I didn't answer. I let him sit with it. I wasn't angry in that moment. Just sad. For them. For how long they'd misunderstood. For how long I let them. But also, for how clearly I saw them now. People will show you who they are, eventually. The question is, will you look? I stood, carefully gathering the folder back into my arms. You said I had 24 hours to leave, I said. Ethan looked up, eyes wide. I'm giving you the same. And with that, I walked back toward my room, my slippers soft against the wood floor. Behind me, the silence didn't break. It deepened. The hours that followed were quiet. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just quiet in that brittle way things get after something breaks. Like everyone is too afraid to move in case the crack spreads further. I stayed in my room most of the day. Not hiding. Just waiting. Letting them sit with it. Through the thin walls, I heard Ethan walking up and down the hallway a few times. He stopped outside my door once. His shadow lingered under the crack for a while. Then it moved on. Around 3, I came out to the kitchen. The dishwasher was humming. The floor still had crumbs from breakfast. Luca was on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket, watching something on mute. His earbuds dangled, amused. He looked up as I passed. Eyes unsure. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I opened the fridge. Pulled out the leftover soup from last night. The one I had made before everything shifted. I reheated a bowl. Sat at the small table by the window. The one they used to call Grandma's spot. The spoon clicked against the ceramic. The soup tasted dull. From where I sat, I could see the corner of the living room. The coffee table still had Ethan's planner on it. His favorite pen resting diagonally. The throw pillow I had hand-stitched sat lopsided on the armchair. The one no one let me sit in. I thought about all the little rules that had crept into this house. The unspoken ones. Don't speak too long at dinner. Don't ask too many questions. Don't wear perfume. Don't sit at the front porch swing after 9. They never said it outright. But I learned. Keep small. Take up less space. Be grateful. It's funny how people can rewrite a home without touching the walls. Ethan finally came into the room. He didn't look at me right away. He went to the fridge. Opened it. Closed it again. Then leaned against the counter. His eyes were red. Not from tears. From exhaustion, maybe. Or realization. Mom. I kept eating. Slowly. He waited. I didn't know you'd done all that, he said. The tuition. The insurance. The bills. I said nothing. I thought I was handling things. You thought wrong, I said, without bitterness. Just fact. He looked down. Then back up. Why didn't you ever say no? That made me pause. I looked at him, then. For real. Because I loved you. That was the simplest answer. And the truest. He swallowed hard. His fingers tapped the edge of the counter. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. That landed. He looked hurt. But he didn't argue. Behind him, the kettle clicked off. No one moved to pour the water. Luca appeared in the doorway. His voice was soft. Grandma? I turned to him. He looked different. No longer smug. Just scared, maybe. Are you really making us leave? I didn't answer right away. You made me feel like I didn't belong, I said. Like I was lucky just to be allowed in the room. He looked down. I didn't mean. Yes. You did. I stood then. Slowly. Took my empty bowl to the sink. Ran water over it until it steamed. Ethan moved out of my way. Silently. When I dried my hands, I turned to them both. You need to learn something, I said. When you treat someone like a burden long enough, they start to believe it. And when they stop believing it, they leave. Luca's lip trembled. We said sorry. Being sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. Ethan looked at me then, really looked. Maybe for the first time in years. So what now? I looked at the calendar on the wall. A picture of sunflowers I had put up last fall. No one else had noticed when the pages turned. You have until tomorrow. That's what you gave me. I'm giving it back. And I walked away. No door slam. No dramatics. Just a clear line drawn. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for holding the pen. It happened fast. 1 minute, I was rinsing out my coffee cup. The next, Ethan collapsed onto the kitchen floor. I didn't panic. Not at first. Maybe because I'd seen too many emergencies in my time. Maybe because part of me had been holding everything in for so long, I couldn't feel anything sudden anymore. But Luca screamed. Dad! He dropped his phone. It clattered against the tile. His hands went to Ethan's shoulders. Shaking. Too rough. Too fast. Dad, wake up. I turned off the faucet. Set the cup down carefully. Then walked over. Ethan was still breathing. His chest rising and falling, shallow. His face pale. Eyes closed. He looked smaller somehow. Like the weight of the truth had finally landed on him, and it was too much. Get me a towel, I told Luca. He didn't argue. Ran down the hall, socks sliding. I knelt. Checked his pulse. It was there. Unsteady but there. He moaned. Tried to open his eyes. When Luca came back, I pressed the damp towel to Ethan's forehead. Sat beside him. Quiet. Still. No rush now. Just waiting. You learn, as you get older, that sometimes the body reacts to what the heart has been avoiding. All that guilt, all that denial, it catches up. It doesn't care what time it is. After a few minutes, he stirred more. Blinked against the overhead light. What happened? He whispered. You fainted, I said softly. You'll be okay. He sat up slowly with Luca's help. Still dazed. I'm sorry, he muttered. The first real sorry. Not defensive. Not obligatory. Just raw. Luca sat beside him, hands shaking. Are you okay, Dad? Ethan nodded. Then turned to me. I didn't mean to push you that far. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't reply. I just handed him a glass of water. He drank it in silence. That's when I noticed something shift in Luca's face. He looked at me, not like a kid afraid of punishment, but like someone realizing a truth for the first time. Grandma, he said, voice cracking. I'm sorry too. I studied him. Not the words. The way he sat. Shoulders forward. Eyes full. I didn't mean all those things, he said. I was just trying to sound cool in front of friends. I didn't mean you were nothing. Or that you didn't belong. But he had meant it. In that moment, he had believed it. I could have reminded him. Could have made him squirm. But instead, I asked something else. Which part didn't you mean? He blinked. What? Which part? I repeated. That I'm not your real grandma? That I'm a burden? That I smell like soup and take up space? His lips trembled. None of it. The tears came then. Real ones. The kind that kids try to hold back but can't. The kind that show you they've been carrying something heavier than they understood. I miss you, he said. I miss how things used to be. When you'd help with my homework. When we made banana bread. When we talked. He paused. You used to care about everything I said. Like really care. I felt that in my chest. Because it was true. I had. I still did. But I wasn't sure if I could keep caring at that cost. Then why did you stop? I asked. He wiped his face with his sleeve. Because Mom did. And Dad. And I thought, maybe that's how I was supposed to treat you. There it was. The echo of behavior. The way cruelty becomes normal when it's passed down in silence. You learn from them, I said. And they learned from how much I let slide. No one argued. Not this time. Ethan rubbed his temples. Still pale. Still shaken. I let him talk to you like that. I let myself believe you were just here. Not the reason we were still in this house. Still together. I looked at them both. And I believed, for a moment, they finally understood. But understanding and change aren't the same. I hear what you're saying, I said. But words aren't enough. They nodded. Because now they knew. Now they felt it. And maybe for the first time, they realized I could leave. Or ask them to. Because now the power had shifted. And I wasn't afraid to hold it. The next morning came slow. I stood in the kitchen again. Same tile floors. Same familiar creak from the second cabinet door. But nothing felt the same. Ethan came in first. He looked worn. Hair uncombed. T-shirt wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. That was always a sign with him. He used to say a clean shave made him feel in control. Luca followed a few minutes later. Hoodie. Pajama pants. Eyes still puffy. No one spoke at first. I poured coffee. No one asked for any. I didn't offer. I sat at the head of the table. This time, no one questioned it. Ethan cleared his throat. Mom, we talked last night. Luca and I. We want to say something. I looked at them both. We know we messed up, he said. We took you for granted. We treated you like you didn't matter. Luca nodded, quickly. We were wrong. I was wrong. I let the silence stretch. Not to punish. To let it land. What do you think I want to hear right now? I asked. They glanced at each other. Unsure. Ethan said, that will do better. I shook my head. That's not enough. Not anymore. He looked like he wanted to argue. But he stopped himself. I sipped my coffee. Still warm. Still bitter. For 3 years, I said, I carried this household. Quietly. And you both let yourselves believe I was the one being carried. Luca's head dropped. You treated me like an inconvenience, I continued. Not just once. Over and over. Every time I wasn't invited to the table. Every time my name wasn't mentioned when someone asked about this house. Every time you looked through me instead of at me. I looked at Ethan now. Straight on. And you stood by while it happened. I didn't mean to, he said. But you did. He opened his mouth, then shut it. I turned to Luca. You said I wasn't really your grandmother. I didn't mean that, he whispered. But you said it. And the truth is, part of you believed it. Because your parents made you believe it was okay to diminish me. The room felt smaller then. Still. Even the birds outside had gone quiet. I want you both to understand something, I said. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. One that you reinforced every time I said nothing. Ethan looked down. His hands trembled slightly. What do we do now? He asked. I exhaled. Slowly. Carefully. You're going to leave, I said. Just like you told me to do. 24 hours. You still have time. Luca's voice cracked. But we don't have anywhere to go. I nodded. I didn't either. When I gave up my home. My savings. My life. But that was different, Ethan said. No. It wasn't. You just didn't notice. Or care. He dropped his head into his hands. Shoulders shaking. Luca reached across the table. Grandma, please. We're sorry. I believe you're sorry, I said. But you're not changed. Not yet. And I don't reward apologies without change. Ethan looked up, eyes red. We'll change. We'll prove it. I hope so, I said. But it won't be here. They both went silent again. I stood. Walked to the window. The sun was rising, casting soft light across the garden. The hydrangeas had started to bloom. I'd planted them my first spring here. No one else watered them. Behind me, I heard the chair legs scrape the floor as they stood too. I turned. You asked what happens now, I said. What happens now is I choose peace. I choose boundaries. I choose me. Ethan opened his mouth again. But I raised my hand. I'm not angry, I said. But I am done being small in my own life. Luca was crying now. Ethan was holding back tears, barely. And me? I felt clear. Not vindicated. Not proud. Just steady. Because finally, after all this time, I'd remembered what it meant to matter to myself. And that was the only truth I needed to stand on. The final piece of me had returned. Now it was their turn to find theirs. It's been 2 weeks since they left. The house is quieter. But not empty. Luca texted once. Just a simple, "Hi, hope you're okay." I didn't reply right away. I needed space to let silence mean something different this time. Ethan hasn't reached out. I'm not surprised. For some people, silence is still easier than truth. I changed the locks. Not out of spite. Just practicality. I rearranged the furniture in the living room. Pushed the couch closer to the window. Moved my reading chair back to its old spot. The one they always said was in the way. I ordered curtains I actually like. Yellow linen. Soft and light. I stopped buying the cereal Luca liked and stocked the pantry with things I grew up eating: steel-cut oats, dried figs, tea in tins. Food that tastes like memory, not obligation. The hydrangeas in the front yard are blooming brighter than ever. Funny how things flourish when the air clears. I found an old box in the garage last night. One I hadn't touched since I moved in. It had my college degree, a couple of photo albums, and a letter I wrote to myself on my 50th birthday. I read it sitting on the back steps, sipping coffee from a chipped mug I'd almost thrown out. In the letter, I'd written, "Don't ever shrink for someone who would never stretch for you." At the time, I thought I was just being poetic. But now, it feels like a map I forgot I'd drawn. You ever look back at something you once wrote and realize you were smarter than you gave yourself credit for? The house feels mine now. Not because of the deed or the payments. But because I take up space in it, fully. I laugh louder when I talk to the neighbors. I burn toast without apologizing. I leave books half finished and don't feel guilty. I eat dinner at the table with music playing, not TV noise. I matter here. And that's not something anyone can vote on. I've had a few people ask me if I regret it. If it hurts to live alone. If I worry I push them too far. Of course it hurts. It always hurts when you love someone who only loves you conditionally. But pain isn't failure. And loneliness isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person. Being erased is worse. And I won't be erased anymore. I think about the version of myself who walked into this house 3 years ago. Quiet. Grateful. Hopeful. She was kind. She was generous. But she didn't know how to draw a line. Now she does. And maybe one day, when Ethan is ready, he'll come back to this house, not to reclaim it, but to acknowledge it. Maybe Luca will visit and sit across from me and ask real questions about who I was before I became grandma. And maybe they won't. Either way, I'll still be here. Reading. Watering flowers. Sleeping through the night without fear of being too much. Because I used to believe that silence was a kindness. That biting my tongue was an act of love. That patience was the noblest kind of strength. But now I believe something else. Silence is not always grace. Sometimes it's complicity. And I'm done being complicit in my own disappearance. So if you're listening, and you've ever felt small in a space you built, know this. You don't owe anyone your invisibility. You get to take up space. You get to matter. And if it costs you people who never really saw you to begin with, maybe that's a bargain worth taking. This house is mine. And for the first time, so is my voice.